What if the woman you pass every day selling fried snacks by the military base was once the most powerful force in the army? What if the person you've overlooked for years was not only a trailblazer, but the very first female commander in your military's history? Meet María Delgado, an unassuming woman with a past buried beneath years of silence. For most, she's just a quiet figure. But on one fateful hero's day, everything changes. A speech, a name, a shocking revelation that turns everything upside down. Stay with us because this story isn't just about a woman who broke barriers. It's about the quiet power of humility, the lessons we overlook, and the hidden heroes who changed the world without ever asking for recognition. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know. What do you think makes a true hero? In the quiet desert town of Ironstone, Arizona, an elderly woman named María Delgado sells fried snacks near the gates of a military base. To the passing soldiers and mocking teenagers, she seems like just another forgotten face from a slower, fading past. But everything changes on Heroes Day, when a high-ranking general unexpectedly calls her name during a speech and invites her to the stage. What follows is the unraveling of a powerful truth. María Delgado was once the nation's first female military commander, a trailblazer whose legacy was hidden in plain sight. As her story slowly unfolds, the community begins to reckon with the weight of their assumptions, and Maria's quiet presence transforms into a symbol of honor, resilience, and service. This is a story about forgotten heroes, the strength of humility, and the impact of a life lived without need for recognition, until the moment her voice finally echoes across generations. The Arizona sun burned low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rust and gold. A hot wind carried the scent of fried oil and desert sand across a barren stretch of road outside Fort Ironstone. Just beyond the military base's security gates, near a battered chain-link fence lined with faded recruitment posters, stood a small cart with crooked wheels and peeling paint. The red, white, and blue design had once been bright, but time had dulled it like everything else in the desert. Behind the cart stood María Delgado. Her back was straight, her hair silver and tucked into a tight bun, and her eyes held a quiet intensity that had not faded with age. She wore a sun-bleached camouflage jacket with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her boots were scuffed but polished, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she dropped a rolled tortilla into the hot oil. The sizzle cut through the dry air like a whisper of home-cooked comfort. A line of customers, mostly off-duty soldiers and a few curious locals, waited patiently for their orders. Maria said little, only what was necessary. She served each plate with a napkin and a nod. Her menu was simple: chimichangas, taquitos, and sopapillas dusted in cinnamon sugar. The regulars called her Miss Maria. Others called her Ma'am. But most of the town's teenagers had a different name for her, one laced with cruelty and ignorance. "Hey look, there's Grandma G.I. again," one of the boys shouted from across the street. A group of them lingered near the convenience store, their skateboards rattling over the pavement. They were high school kids with time to kill and nowhere better to be. One of them mimed a stiff salute, exaggerating the motion with a mocking grin. "Permission to snack, General Old Lady," another jeered. Maria said nothing. She did not look up. She continued frying with her usual precision, flipping the taquitos with metal tongs, her face unmoved. She had been hearing their taunts for months, maybe longer. Their words rolled off her like dust on her jacket. She had known worse. Behind her, a photograph hung from the cart's side panel, weathered and stained from years in the sun. It was a black and white portrait of a young woman in uniform. The resemblance to Maria was unmistakable. But no one paid much attention. They assumed it was a daughter, maybe even a granddaughter. When the boys finally wandered off, laughing among themselves, Maria exhaled slowly. Her fingers ached from hours of gripping the tongs, but she was used to the pain. She looked out across the desert road, watching the occasional convoy of military trucks pass by. She had once led convoys like those. She had once given orders that saved lives. But now she was just the woman by the fence who sold fried snacks. A soldier approached the cart. Young, fresh-faced, and sweating through his uniform. He gave her a respectful nod. "Afternoon, ma'am. I'll take 2 chimis and a soda." Maria handed him a plate without a word. He smiled and handed over cash. "You know," he said as he picked up his food, "people say you've been here longer than the base itself." Maria gave a small chuckle. Her voice was low, steady. "I've been here longer than most things," she said. He looked at her with a curious expression but did not press for more. Most people did not. They saw an old woman with a food cart, a fixture of the neighborhood, not worth a second thought. But the soldier left with a story he would not forget, even if he did not understand why. Maria wiped her hands on her apron and gazed at the base in the distance. Helicopters hovered above the perimeter. Flags flapped in the dry wind. She could still recall the scent of oil and gunpowder, the sound of boots on tarmac, the weight of a field radio strapped to her back. Those days were far behind her. Or so the world believed. The sun dipped lower. The air cooled slightly and lights from the base flickered on like tiny stars in the darkening sky. Maria packed up slowly, methodically. The cart was rolled behind a corrugated shed where it would be locked away until morning. As she walked home through the gravel-strewn alley behind the base's perimeter, she heard the echo of her name in the wind. Not the taunts of boys, but the firm call of a superior officer. Delgado. Even now, after all these years, she turned her head instinctively. The past, it seemed, was never far behind. Maria's house stood at the edge of the older part of town, tucked into a narrow street lined with weather-worn adobe homes and chain-link fences covered in creeping vines. Her house was small, a single story, painted pale yellow with a sagging roof and a flagpole in the yard. The flag had once been crisp and new, but now it was faded, its threads worn thin by years of desert wind. Still, Maria raised it each morning with the same care she had when she wore the uniform. Inside, the house was quiet. The air smelled faintly of fried food and cedarwood. On the walls hung photographs, some framed, some taped with yellowing edges. Most were of soldiers. Rows of young men and women in dress uniforms, formation photos, blurry shots from foreign airstrips. A few had hand-scribbled messages on the back, signed with names long buried. In the center of the wall above her couch was the largest frame of all. It showed a younger Maria in full dress uniform, standing in front of a military truck with her hands clasped behind her back. Her expression was hard to read. Determined, perhaps, or weary. The caption underneath read, Lieutenant Colonel María Delgado, Commanding Officer, Iron Recon Battalion, June 1989. She looked at it only briefly before setting her keys down on the table and switching on a single lamp. The soft light filled the room, casting long shadows that reached across the old rug and flickered against the photos. She moved slowly, not from weakness but from years of discipline. Everything had its place. The shoes were removed and aligned. The stovetop was wiped down, though she had not used it in days. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights blinked on. A few children passed by on bicycles, laughing as they chased each other through the dusk. Further in the distance, the base's intercom echoed faintly, some code she still understood but no longer needed to obey. On the table beside her sat a wooden box, its surface scarred and dented. She opened it carefully. Inside were her service medals, pinned to a strip of black velvet. Rows of colored ribbons. A silver star. The combat infantry badge. A name tag that still gleamed faintly in the lamplight. She had not shown these to anyone in years. Not since the ceremony where she'd received her retirement orders and shook hands with a colonel who had once refused to salute her during her first command. She could still hear the clapping, polite and brief. She had never wanted applause. She had wanted to be useful. Needed. She ran her fingers along the edges of the medals, pausing at the silver bar of her lieutenant colonel insignia. For a long time, she simply sat in silence, the tea growing cold on the table beside her. Maria had come back to Yuma after 32 years of service. She could have retired anywhere. Phoenix, San Diego, even Washington. But she had chosen to return to the outskirts of Fort Ironstone, a place that had once been her proving ground. Not for nostalgia. Not for recognition. But because she knew the young soldiers there needed someone who understood what it meant to be far from home, to feel invisible even in uniform. That was why she opened her snack cart every morning. Not just to make a living. It was to watch, to listen, to be there. And every so often, she heard a soldier confide something in passing that reminded her of those long deployments, of men and women cracking under the pressure, of moments when a hot meal and a quiet ear could do more than therapy ever could. But none of that mattered to the teenagers who jeered at her each afternoon. To them, she was a relic with a strange wardrobe and no story. She did not blame them. Not entirely. The world no longer taught them to see past the surface. Still, the weight of their laughter lingered. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. A car passed with its windows open, music thumping loud enough to rattle her window. She closed the curtain gently. From her cabinet, she pulled out an old journal, its pages lined with thick strokes of ink. Notes from missions long past. Field coordinates. tactical decisions she had once made without hesitation. She flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes pausing at a scribbled map of a Central American village. Her finger tapped on a date. December 14, 1984. A firefight. A wounded comrade carried across a ravine. She had dragged him for over 2 miles under fire. He had survived. He had sent her a letter once, years later. Thanked her. Said he named his daughter after her. She had not replied. The doorbell rang. It startled her. No one rang her bell this late. She stood slowly, checked the front window, and saw a silhouette. A boy. One of the teenagers. The one with the skateboard and the blue hoodie. He held something in his hands. She opened the door without a word. The boy hesitated. He muttered, eyes cast low. My dad. He's stationed at the base. He saw you today. Said you were a real soldier. Like high up. Maria said nothing. Her face betrayed no emotion. He asked me if I knew who you were. I didn't. I'm sorry. I was kind of a jerk. He held out a small brown bag. I brought you some pan dulce from the bakery. My mom made too much. Thought you might like some. Maria took the bag silently. Looked him in the eyes. She nodded once. The boy shuffled awkwardly before turning to leave. Tell your father, she said quietly. He still owes me a game of dominoes. The boy looked back, confused. What? She almost smiled. He will understand. The door closed gently behind her. She returned to her chair by the window, unwrapped the sweet bread, and took a bite. Outside, the night air cooled the walls of her home, but inside, the warmth held. The morning of Heroes' Day arrived with little fanfare in Maria's quiet neighborhood. The sky was cloudless, the kind of endless blue that only Arizona seemed to offer, stretching from one horizon to the next with no interruption but the occasional hawk riding the thermals. A breeze carried the smell of mesquite and sun-baked asphalt through the air. Maria rose early, long before sunrise. Her routine never changed. At exactly 5:45, she brewed a pot of coffee, black, no sugar, and stepped outside to raise the flag in her yard. With steady hands, she clipped the corners, adjusted the folds, and watched it ascend into the morning light. As always, she paused for a full 30 seconds once it reached the top. Not because it was a rule, because it was right. Inside, she prepared for the day's work. Today was no ordinary day. The base would host its annual Heroes' Day celebration. Vendors from across the county would set up near the parade grounds. Bands would play, speeches would be made, and medals would be handed out to young cadets and retired veterans alike. It was the one day each year that Fort Ironstone opened its gates to the public. Maria did not plan to attend the ceremony. Instead, she polished the glass display on her food cart, replaced the menu with a fresh sheet, and packed twice as many supplies. On Heroes' Day, foot traffic tripled. Soldiers brought their families. Retirees from out of state visited old barracks. Children wore plastic helmets and waved miniature flags. Her cart, always stationed just outside the base's west entrance, would be right in the path of the morning crowd. By 8 o'clock, the first wave of visitors began arriving. Cars lined the dirt lots. Volunteers in orange vests directed traffic. Children squealed as they chased each other through the grass. Maria's cart stood proud beneath a large tan awning. The aroma of frying oil and seasoned meat drifted across the base perimeter. One young soldier, barely out of basic training, approached the cart with wide eyes and a hesitant step. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, adjusting his cap. "Are you the one who makes the famous chimes?" Maria nodded once. "You want two?" "Yes, ma'am. Please." She handed him a plate, still hot and steaming. "I've heard about you," he added, almost nervously. "The guys at the barracks say your food keeps us sane." Maria did not respond. She rarely did when they said things like that. She had heard it all before. Still, the words warmed something beneath the surface. By mid-morning, a line stretched nearly a block down the road. She moved quickly, her hands a blur of efficiency. Order, cook, wrap, serve. Every movement precise. No wasted steps. Her feet ached, but she stood firm. She never sat behind her cart. As the sun rose higher, the sound of music from the main stage carried faintly on the wind. A brass band played patriotic songs. Speakers crackled with the opening remarks of local politicians. Maria kept her eyes on the grill. Then, sometime just after noon, she noticed the change. It started with the soldiers. They began to stand a little straighter. Some turned toward the stage instinctively. Even the off-duty officers who had been laughing and eating stepped back, their expressions sobering. And then came the boots. The sound of polished leather striking concrete. Measured, even, commanding. a rhythm that carried authority without needing volume. Maria looked up. General Andrew Kincaid. He was flanked by 2 junior officers and a staff aide. Dressed in his full uniform, he walked with quiet dignity, the ribbons on his chest catching the sunlight. His eyes met Maria's as he approached, and his face broke into a familiar, weathered smile. He stopped in front of the cart and saluted. Maria hesitated only for a breath before returning it. "Still standing tall, Delgado," he said, his voice gravelly but clear. "I do not know how to stand otherwise," Maria replied. He chuckled. "Heroes' Day is not complete without your chimichangas." She handed him a fresh one without charge. He took it with a nod. "I came early to ask a favor," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "There's a ceremony in 20 minutes. We're honoring lifetime service and groundbreaking contributions. I want you on that stage." Maria said nothing. She looked back at the cart, the line of waiting customers, the hot grill still crackling with oil. "I'm not interested in applause," she said. "I know. But the young ones need to hear your story." She paused. Her eyes softened slightly as they scanned the crowd, dozens of soldiers, young and old, milling about, sharing stories, eating food, laughing. A group of children played tug-of-war with a length of rope, giggling with delight. Among them was the boy in the blue hoodie, the one who had come to her door. He was with his father now, a man in full uniform. She looked back at General Kincaid. "You're sure it matters?" He nodded. "More than ever." Maria removed her apron slowly. She wiped her hands clean and rolled down her sleeves. Her jacket, though faded, still bore the insignia stitched above her heart. She stepped from behind the cart. "Then let us go," she said. Together they walked side by side down the main thoroughfare. Soldiers turned to watch. Conversation stopped. A few saluted. Others whispered, not yet knowing who she was, but sensing the weight of her presence. The sound of boots on pavement echoed down the path to the parade ground. It was not the sound of age. It was the sound of command. The parade ground was awash with color. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised platform draped in deep navy fabric. Flags fluttered on tall poles, casting thin shadows that danced across the stage in the breeze. Brass instruments glinted in the sun. Cameras clicked and whirred. The audience filled every seat and spilled beyond the perimeter ropes, families standing shoulder to shoulder, squinting into the sunlight with programs in hand. The voice of the MC echoed through a portable sound system, introducing local dignitaries, retired officers, and high-ranking guests. Speeches had already been given. Medals had already been pinned. A plaque had been unveiled. It was the kind of ceremony that followed a pattern as old as the institution it honored. But then the MC paused. A rustle moved through the audience like wind through dry grass. He adjusted the microphone, his voice suddenly lower, more deliberate. "Our next moment," he began, "requires no introduction, though I suspect many of you will find it to be a revelation." Maria stood just offstage with General Kincaid. From behind the curtain, she could see the faces of the crowd. Young soldiers in pressed uniforms, veterans in jackets decorated with pins, civilians holding plastic cups of lemonade. Some chatted. Some leaned back in their chairs. No one expected what was coming. General Kincaid stepped forward to the podium. His medals clinked softly as he moved. "There are stories in our history that get lost not because they are forgotten," he said, "but because those who lived them never saw the need to speak loudly. Today, I want to make sure that silence ends." He paused, scanning the crowd. "You've all passed her food cart. Some of you buy from her every morning. You may have called her Ma'am or Miss Maria. Some of you may not have called her anything at all." The murmurs began. People exchanged glances. A few in the front row turned their heads toward the stage entrance. "But what you may not know," Kincaid continued, "is that the woman behind that cart was once the first female commander in our military's history. She led a reconnaissance battalion through some of the most dangerous operations of the late 20th century. She carried wounded men across fire zones. She negotiated ceasefires in foreign languages. She trained soldiers who are now generals themselves. Her name is Lieutenant Colonel Maria Delgado." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned sharply. Several soldiers in the audience instinctively rose to their feet. Cameras swung toward the stage. Somewhere, a child asked their parent, "Is that true?" Kincaid turned and extended his hand. "Colonel Delgado," he said, "if you would join us." Maria stepped onto the stage. She did not do so slowly. She did not hesitate. Her stride was deliberate, her spine straight. The camouflage jacket she wore, though faded, looked like part of a dress uniform in that moment. The silver bar still pinned above her chest gleamed under the sun. A hush fell. She reached Kincaid and nodded. They shook hands. Then she turned to the microphone, looking out over the sea of faces. Some stunned, some awed, some red with embarrassment. "I did not come today to be honored," she said, her voice strong and steady. "I came to feed those who serve. That was always enough for me." She paused, letting the silence breathe. But when you spend your life in the service of something greater than yourself, you learn that recognition is never the point. Discipline, duty, integrity. These are the things that carry you when applause fades. They carried me. They still do. She scanned the crowd and saw the teenagers, her former hecklers, huddled together near the edge of the audience, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. She held their gaze for a moment. "To the young soldiers," she continued, "you do not know yet what you are capable of. You may think no one sees your struggle, but someone always sees. Someone always remembers. Sometimes that someone is a quiet old woman selling taquitos, and sometimes that someone is you." In the stillness, a few people rose to their feet, then more, until the crowd stood in its entirety. The applause began as a ripple and surged into a wave. Not the kind born from surprise or ceremony, but the kind rooted in reverence. The kind given to someone who had earned it in silence. Maria stepped back from the microphone. Kincaid turned to her and spoke just loudly enough for her to hear. "Told you it mattered." She allowed herself the faintest smile. As the ceremony concluded, people came forward. Soldiers she had once trained. Officers she had once reprimanded. Young women who had just entered the academy and looked at her as if she were a legend come to life. The boy in the blue hoodie stood in the crowd with his father. He gave her a small wave. She returned it with a nod. That night, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the crowd began to scatter, the story of María Delgado spread through the base like wildfire. Every barracks buzzed with it. The teens who had mocked her fell silent. The soldiers who had bought her food each morning now bowed their heads when they passed her cart. Her name was no longer just a footnote. It moved through the base like the sound of distant boots on gravel. Unmistakable. Lasting. It was the name in the wind. The following morning unfolded much like any other. The sun crept over the desert ridge with its usual golden blaze. The sand shimmered under its touch, and the wind stirred early, carrying a thin film of dust and the scent of creosote bushes. But though the light looked the same, Fort Ironstone had changed. It started in the small things. At 5:45, Maria raised her flag as always. But this time, as she fastened the final clip and stepped back to observe it, she noticed a young cadet standing silently across the street, watching her. His hands were at his sides, feet planted, eyes locked on the flag as it rose. He said nothing. When it reached the top, he gave her a solemn salute. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Maria lingered a moment longer before going inside. Her morning continued with measured rhythm. She brewed her coffee, prepared the dough, packed the cart, and wiped down every surface until it gleamed. But when she rolled the cart out to its usual place near the west entrance of the base, something unfamiliar greeted her. A queue. Not 2 or 3 people. A full line. 20 deep. Soldiers, cadets, civilians. Some she recognized. Some she had never seen before. All were waiting, not with idle chatter or impatience, but with a quiet air of reverence. As she positioned the cart and lit the burner, the line adjusted itself like clockwork. No one rushed her. No one spoke above a whisper. The soldier at the front stepped forward only after she gave a slight nod. He was young, freckles across his nose, probably not more than 19. "Ma'am," he said, "may I have one of the ones with extra jalapenos?" "You can," Maria replied. As she handed him the hot food wrapped in brown paper, he lingered. "I read about you last night," he said. "The archives. You trained with General Haskell?" "I trained Haskell," she corrected. The young man blinked. Then he smiled faintly. "Thank you, ma'am." He stepped aside. The next soldier in line was a woman in her mid-30s. She had a row of chevrons on her sleeve and a sharpness to her eyes. "You gave a hell of a speech," she said. "My daughter was in the crowd. She wants to be like you now." Maria said nothing at first, simply wrapped the order and handed it over. "Then make sure she knows what it costs," Maria said. "Pride is not a ribbon. It is a debt." The woman nodded slowly. By mid-morning, the line had tripled. News outlets had picked up the story. A photo of Maria on stage beside General Kincaid had been shared across military social channels, captioned, "The Colonel in the Apron." Some laughed at the name. Others repeated it like a title of honor. But the teenagers, those who had mocked her days earlier, had yet to appear. Until noon. Maria had just finished serving a group of foreign dignitaries from the airbase when she spotted them near the edge of the sidewalk. The boy in the blue hoodie stood in front, hands tucked in his pockets. Behind him were the other three, the ones who had thrown words like knives and laughed when she did not flinch. They did not jeer today. They did not whistle. They did not record her on their phones. They approached with the same caution one might use at a graveyard. The boy stepped forward and removed his hood. "Colonel," he said quietly. Maria turned to him slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "We wanted to say sorry," he continued, "for everything. We didn't know. We were just being stupid." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a gift bag. Small. Wrapped in desert camouflage paper. "We chipped in," he said. "It's not much, but we wanted to thank you." Maria stared at the bag for a moment before accepting it. She did not open it. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I think we do," the boy replied. Then, with a nervous gesture, he saluted. It was imperfect. His elbow flared too wide and the angle was shallow. But it was earnest. Maria held his gaze. Then, slowly, she returned the salute with perfect form. The boy's shoulders lowered, his eyes bright. He stepped back. They all did. Maria finally looked into the bag. Inside was a hand-painted nameplate. The kind that sits on a desk. Read, "Colonel María Delgado. First, fearless, forever." She closed the bag gently. That evening, when the cart was packed away and the sun had begun its slow descent behind the hills, Maria returned home. She placed the nameplate on her mantle beneath the old photograph of her in uniform. It sat there not as a trophy but as a reminder, not of who she had been, but of what it meant to live with quiet strength, to carry weight without demand, to let history find you when it mattered most. The days following the Heroes' Day ceremony unfolded like ripples in still water. Word of Maria Delgado's past had moved far beyond the confines of Fort Ironstone. Articles were published. Interviews requested. Old colleagues reached out. Retired officers who had once served under her sent letters from across the country. Some enclosed faded photographs, yellowed commendations, or long-forgotten unit patches tucked into folded parchment. But Maria declined every offer for televised interviews and podcasts. She refused to appear on morning shows or speak at promotional events. She had no interest in selling a version of herself edited for applause. The people who needed her story had already heard it. The rest could wait. Still, the recognition came in other ways. One morning, she opened her mailbox and found an envelope marked with the Department of Defense seal. Inside was a certificate, bordered in gold, with an official statement signed by the Secretary of the Army. It named her a distinguished contributor to historical legacy and mentorship. Enclosed with the certificate was a letter, handwritten by a young woman at the academy. She had seen Maria speak on Heroes' Day and had since chosen to join the engineering corps. "I did not believe someone like me could wear a uniform," the letter read. "Now I know otherwise." Maria placed that letter beside her grandfather's compass, the one she had carried in the field for years. They belonged together. One quiet afternoon, General Kincaid visited her. He was dressed in civilian clothes, a simple flannel shirt and tan slacks. He brought coffee and 2 sweet rolls from the cafe across town. "You've caused quite the stir," he said as he settled onto her porch. "Even command is buzzing. They're talking about naming a new leadership seminar after you." "They do not need my name," Maria replied. He smiled. "No, but they need what it stands for." They sat in silence for a while. The desert wind stirred the leaves. In the distance, the base's bugler played taps for the flag lowering. The sound drifted gently through the air. "You know," Kincaid said at last, "I still remember the first day I met you." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You were standing in a training field with 2 lieutenants shouting over each other. You didn't say a word. You just stepped between them, took both rifles and threw them into the mud." Maria gave a faint smile. "They needed reminding that leadership does not shout." Kincaid chuckled. "They never forgot it." After he left, Maria watched the sun descend from her porch, its orange glow bleeding across the wide Arizona sky. She thought of the recruits she had trained, the operations she had led, the silence she had chosen. There had been so many voices over the years, each loud in their moment, each certain they were the future. But time had a way of proving otherwise. It was never the loudest who endured. It was the ones who did the work no matter who was watching. The ones who held the line when no one else would. The ones who gave more than they took. Later that night, she sat at her table and began writing letters. Not formal ones. Not for awards or acknowledgments. These were short notes, handwritten, addressed to soldiers she had served with. Some were alive, some long gone. She wrote them anyway. Each letter began the same way. I still remember what you taught me. She placed them in a box on her shelf beside a folded flag and her original service patch. There was no ceremony for it. No one to witness the gesture. It was enough that it was done. That week, Fort Ironstone invited her to speak at a closed seminar for its most promising cadets. The event was not recorded. No photos were taken. The room was small, windowless, filled with 20 soldiers in pressed uniforms sitting at perfect attention. Maria stood at the front, hands behind her back, and regarded them silently for a long moment. I am not here to inspire you, she said finally. I am here to prepare you. No one moved. No one spoke. You will be tested, each of you. Not once, not loudly, but in silence, in the dark, in the moments between orders when no one is watching. That is where you prove what you are. A young cadet in the second row raised his hand. His voice trembled when he spoke. How did you know when it was enough? Maria looked at him for a long while before answering. It is never enough. You carry the weight forever. But if you carry it with honor, it will not break you. It will shape you. When the seminar ended, no one clapped. They simply stood and saluted. She returned it. Then she left without another word. That night, beneath a sky full of stars, the desert was still. The air held the chill of spring's slow retreat. Maria sat by her window, the soft hum of night insects rising from the mesquite brush. A photograph of her younger self rested on the table, flanked by medals she no longer displayed. Outside, she heard a small knock at the door. She opened it to find the boy in the blue hoodie again. This time, he wore a junior cadet's uniform. Ill-fitting, freshly pressed. He handed her a small envelope. They said I could pick someone to write to as part of the mentorship program, he said. I picked you. Maria accepted the envelope. The boy hesitated, then looked up at her. Will you read it? I will, she said. He nodded and stepped back. As he turned to leave, she spoke again. When you stand before a decision, she said, remember this moment, and ask yourself what kind of soldier you want to be. Then act. That is all. He nodded once, then disappeared into the dark. Maria closed the door softly. The house was quiet, but her voice would live on, passed from one generation to the next, not in shouts but in memory, not as myth but as truth. Spring faded into the dry blaze of early summer, and the rhythm of Fort Ironstone continued on. Trucks rolled down its gravel roads. Training drills echoed from the fields. Uniforms came and went, faces changed, but the figure near the west entrance of the base remained the same. Each morning at dawn, María Delgado raised her flag. Each day, she rolled her cart to the edge of the base, set up her burners, and greeted the soldiers as they passed. She no longer blended into the scenery. Her cart bore a small plaque now, one that someone had quietly affixed without asking, brushed bronze etched with the words, "In service then, in service still." People came not just for food but for words, advice. A moment of quiet in the company of someone who had walked the same path and emerged, not unscathed but unbent. One morning she found a folded paper tucked beneath a bundle of fresh tortillas. A child had written it in crayon. "You are my favorite hero," it said. "I want to be brave like you." From Ellie, age 6. She placed the note in a tin where she kept things worth remembering. The boy in the blue hoodie, whose real name she finally learned was Diego, became a regular fixture. He helped set up her cart on weekends, cleaned the burners, organized the condiment containers. He never asked for praise and she never offered it. He was learning. That was enough. One afternoon, she brought out a small metal tin and handed it to him. "What is it?" Diego asked. "Army issue compass," she said. "Belonged to my grandfather. Then to me. Now to you." He opened it slowly, turning it in his hands. The glass was worn, the needle scratched, but it still pointed north. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You already have," Maria said. That week, the base commander announced a new name for the Central Leadership Hall. The building, long known as simply the Command Annex, was rededicated with ceremony and full honors. A new sign was installed over the entrance, crafted from polished stone and steel. Read, "The Delgado Hall of Leadership and Service." Maria was invited to cut the ribbon. She declined. "I've done my part," she said. "Let the new one step forward." So they asked Diego. With trembling hands, wearing a borrowed uniform, he stood before the building and cut the ribbon as a bugler played. His eyes searched the crowd, and when he found her standing near the back, arms crossed, he smiled. She returned it with a nod. In the weeks that followed, young cadets began asking to interview her. Not for articles, not for television, but for history projects, mentorship papers, oral archives. She agreed to only a few. In one interview, a soft-spoken recruit asked, "If you could speak to the person you were when you joined the military, what would you say to her?" Maria thought long and hard before answering. "I would say, the silence you endure will one day speak for itself. Stand firm. They will hear you in time." That quote was later carved into the stone wall inside Delgado Hall, beneath a portrait of her in uniform. No medals, no titles. Just a woman standing in front of a field tent, wind in her hair, hand on her sidearm, eyes set on something just beyond the frame. By summer's end, Fort Ironstone held a private ceremony attended only by active service members and select veterans. It was called the Evening of Honors. Maria did not expect to be part of it. She stood near the back of the room, dressed plainly, her presence unnoticed by many, until the lights dimmed. Until General Kincaid took the stage and spoke the words no one expected. "We are here tonight," he said, "to mark the end of an era." He stepped aside, and a spotlight found her. The room rose as one. She was called forward, not to be honored with flowers or medals, but with silence. The kind reserved for legends. The kind that lingers heavier than sound. Kincaid spoke only one more sentence. "Colonel Delgado, the nation remembers." That night, as the sun sank and the air cooled across the base, Maria stood at her usual place on the porch. The desert wind whispered across the plain, lifting specks of dust into the fading light. The stars began to appear, one by one, indifferent and eternal. Inside, on her wall, hung a framed series of letters from former soldiers, many of whom she had forgotten, all of whom had not forgotten her. One letter ended with this: "You taught us that strength is quiet, and that legacy is not measured by what is shouted, but by what endures. You never asked us to follow you. We did anyway." Maria sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. The sound of distant boots echoed faintly in the stillness. She was no longer just the woman with the food cart. She was the thread in the uniform, the weight behind the salute, the voice beyond the years. She was not a chapter. She was the footnote that changed the story. The end. Here are 7 moral lessons drawn from this story. 1. True strength does not shout, it endures. In a world that often equates power with volume, Maria Delgado stood as a quiet contrast. She never demanded recognition. She didn't chase applause or correct those who mocked her. Instead, she endured. Her strength was not in what she said, but in what she continued to do despite being overlooked, ridiculed, and forgotten. It reminds us that resilience is not always loud. Sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who keep showing up, carrying their weight with dignity, even when no one notices. Strength, in its most enduring form, is often silent. 2. The past does not lose its value just because others forget it. When the teenagers mocked Maria for being old and unremarkable, they did so out of ignorance. They did not know her past. They could not imagine that the quiet woman behind the food cart had once commanded troops, led missions, and trained generals. But the truth of her life did not disappear because others failed to remember it. Her worth did not lessen with time or disinterest. History, though often buried, never stops being true. This teaches us to look deeper before we judge, and to respect the layers of a life we cannot immediately see. Everyone has a story. Not everyone wears it on their sleeve. 3. Legacy is built through service, not self-promotion. Maria's legacy did not come from a memoir, a press release, or a viral video. It came from years of steadfast service, both in uniform and afterward. She trained soldiers. She helped shape leaders. She fed the hungry without fanfare. Her story surfaced only when someone else chose to tell it. That is the mark of real legacy. It is not built by shouting your name, but by living in a way that others remember you even when you are no longer in the room. The most lasting legacies often rise from quiet, consistent acts of service. 4. The wisdom of the past has value for the future. Maria became a mentor not by title, but by presence. Her story, once revealed, became a guiding light for younger generations. Cadets sought her out. Teenagers who once mocked her began to listen. She taught them that leadership is not about commanding attention, but about standing firm when the world looks away. She showed them that history is not a list of names, but a living map. In an age that moves fast and forgets quickly, Maria reminded everyone that the future is always standing on the shoulders of those who came before. Wisdom is not outdated. It is foundational. 5. Respect is earned in silence and remembered in action. Maria never asked to be respected. But when the truth came to light, those who had mocked her stood in stunned silence. Soldiers saluted. Teenagers apologized. Even generals bowed their heads. Why? Because her life spoke for itself. Respect, when it is real, comes not from titles but from evidence. Evidence of sacrifice, consistency, and principle. And once earned, real respect leaves a lasting impression. Maria didn't demand respect. She became worthy of it, and people recognized it the moment they saw her clearly. 6. Every generation needs examples, not just instructors. Instruction tells you what to do, but example shows you who to become. Maria became a living example for people like Diego and the young cadets. She didn't teach them by handing out rules. She taught them by living a certain way, by treating others with humility, and by standing firm in her values without ever boasting. Her presence taught more than any manual could. And in doing so, she helped shape the next generation, not into copies of herself, but into individuals who understood what it means to serve, to sacrifice, and to lead with integrity. 7. Quiet lives can carry the loudest echoes. In the end, Maria did not retire with a parade. She did not fill stadiums with her story, but she changed people. She left behind a transformed community, a new leadership hall bearing her name, and a generation of future soldiers who would carry her voice forward. The echo of her life will stretch beyond the base, beyond Arizona, and into places she will never see. That is the lesson. A life lived with purpose, humility, and courage can ripple across time and touch people long after the speaker is gone. You do not need to be famous to leave a mark. You only need to live truthfully. These 7 moral lessons remind us that heroism is not a costume, leadership is not a spotlight, and legacy is not a monument. It is how you treat others when no one is watching. It is the values you carry through years of quiet labor. And most of all, it is the strength to keep going, not for applause but because it is right. This is the legacy of Maria Delgado. And in it, we see a reflection of the best parts of ourselves, if we choose to live that way. Disclaimer. This story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of providing valuable moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and insights for our viewers. While the characters, events, and scenarios are products of imagination, the underlying themes of resilience, humility, and leadership are intended to offer meaningful takeaways. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The goal of this video is to engage, inspire, and encourage personal growth through storytelling. And that brings us to the end of Maria Delgado's incredible journey. A reminder that the true strength of a person is often revealed in the most unexpected ways. Her legacy, shaped by humility and service, continues to inspire all of us to lead with honor, whether in the spotlight or in quiet moments of everyday life. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a little motivation today. We have many more powerful stories just like this one waiting for you, so be sure to check out the other videos on our channel. And remember, your thoughts matter to us. Drop a comment below and let us know what you took away from this story, or share your own thoughts on leadership and perseverance. Until next time, keep seeking inspiration, stay humble, and never stop learning. We'll see you in the next video.